Glad you've had a chance to join us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, just to give you some background about what Devin and I are doing on Hannibal TV is we launched UFO Prophets as we're not the prophets. We try to cover the prophets, right? So we started getting feedback a lot in the channel about people saying, I wish someone kept up with the dates and what's being said. And, you know, because I forget this guy said that and this lady said this. And we kind of keep track of that, and we kind of come back in periodically and just check on where we are with some of their prophecies, right? But one angle that we wanted to make sure we were covering is what's going on in Washington too. What we've seen this year is they're part of the prophets now too, right? We have Anna, Pauline, and Luna promising things and different people saying things. So we wanted to cover that angle with you as well. So just to start, do you want to introduce yourself to maybe some of the listeners on the Hannibal TV that aren't familiar with your work and just give them a quick background?
Yeah, what's up, everyone? Matt Laslo coming to you from the swamp here in Washington, D.C. I've been a political reporter for 19 years now, covering drug policy for Playboy, Rolling Stone, Vice News Tonight, and then covered technology and stuff as a correspondent with Wired magazine, data privacy, Silicon Valley, all that, crypto. But then a year and a half ago, I launched a new Substack called Ask a Poll, like Ask a Politician. And really, it's our Ask a Poll UAP website, just askapollUAP.com. That's been blowing up. I love it because our community, y'all feed me questions, and then I take your questions, and I get to push these lying 535 politicians on Capitol Hill with your questions. And I love it. Keep them coming. There's really a power that you all have that I don't have. You know, the media has been written off by everyone, left, right, and center for good reasons, for some, bad reasons for others. But that's why I wanted to put you all in the driver's seat. And so, like, I just love it when I go up to lawmakers and they'll, like, you know, usually roll their eyes at me. But if I'm like, hey, your constituents wondering this, they're like, oh, a voter. Y'all matter. Sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes, right? I mean, that's the interesting angle that people forget is that, and this is kind of where I got into the politics side of it. You know, I've always been a researcher going back to 2000, but getting into the politics side of it, you know, I believe I was first introduced to you through watching Weaponized, right? And watching Jeremy and George and some of their work, but they kind of challenged the listeners to say, hey, reach out to your senator. We'll even give you the links of how to do that. And I accidentally tripped up into a DOD meeting with Senator Ted Budd's office, where I didn't even think they would take me serious. And I get invited to a live Teams event to meet with his DOD staffers on this. So it made me really interested, you know, to read some of what you put out there, because you are on your Ask a Poll site under the UAP section. You had done the 100 of 100 with the senators, because I was really interested in that. And that was going to get me into one of my first questions is, like, it seems like the House is more active than the Senate. So I was really interested to see your Senate piece here, because do you get the same feeling?
Well, yeah. And just so folks know, the 100 for 100 he's talking about in the U.S. Senate, there's 100 senators. And so after UFO whistleblower David Grush dropped his bombshell allegations back in 2023, he later testified that summer, that July. But, you know, he just dropped on Congress's lap, hey, there's these special access programs or SAPs that are funded by you, because all the funding constitutionally comes from Congress, but you guys have no idea what they are. And so even though, the Congressional UAP caucus, that's in the House, and the House Oversight Committee, they still have kind of the ongoing / sputtering UAP investigation going on over there. but now they have the secrets task force, and they've been focusing on JFK and Epstein, and then they have 9/11 and COVID origins, blah, blah, blah. So UAPs have been getting a little shorter shrift in the House, at least the past couple months of this, new Congress and new administration. But like with the Senate, there's just something like senators are just more powerful. If y'all go back to like Schoolhouse Rock, remember House members, they have to face us voters every 2 years. So that's like the rowdy representatives who are closer to us, the insane people of America. God bless us. But then in the Senate, they get 6 years. And so they're supposed to be these statesmen. Sorry, ladies. But ladies, y'all were cut out by the founders. The way the founders envisioned it. They wanted to give senators space from voters so that they could make hard decisions, so that they could investigate and become experts. I forgot to mention to y'all, I guess I also am a professor at a few schools, Johns Hopkins and some other ones. So I think you hear Professor Laslo coming out in me right now. But with that, yeah, it was taking David Grush's accusations, to each of the 100 senators. There was just something tangible about that. And if you go through that list, it's kind of shocking, but maybe not surprising. But only like 10 or 15 senators in the last Congress had even like heard of Grush.
But is that how you asked them? Did you just say, "Have you ever heard of David Grush"? Was that just as simple as you put it to them, or?
No, but I'd kind of feel them out that way. Like, hey, have you guys heard of this? Because some didn't know him by name, but they knew his allegations. Many of the folks on the Senate Intelligence Committee were like, especially like Senator Langford from Oklahoma. He's kind of brilliant because he's done this to me a couple times now. He always just lets me keep talking so that he knows everything I know. And then he goes, yeah, can't talk, not going to talk about that. I'm like, dang it, you beat me in chess again, bro.
Yeah.
And so, but you have had, I know folks in the community have been a little hard on her, but Senator Gillibrand, she's kind of been the most active investigating UAPs in the Senate.
Yeah.
But now that, because she's a Democrat, now that Democrats are out of power and Republicans are in power, we're kind of waiting and watching to see which Republican senator, if any, takes up this mantle. The other one, it's Gillibrand, but then also Senator Mike Rounds. He's been fairly active with this. If you remember Chuck Schumer's UAPDA or UAP Disclosure Act that they've been trying to get into the NDAA, the National Defense Bill, the past couple go-rounds. He's a Republican senator. Senator Rounds is a Republican senator from South Dakota, former governor. Yep. He's the one who teamed up with Schumer on that. And so the first year that Schumer's bill, the UAPDA, dropped, it was Schumer as the lead sponsor. Well, then the last go-round, Rounds was the lead sponsor. And I was curious. I still haven't been able to get a sit-down with Schumer. But I'm curious if because the majority leader, who's like, such a partisan and firebrand, and people, the name Schumer kind of became synonymous with like Pelosi, the way it's just easy to run campaign ads against Pelosi, the liberal from San Francisco, kind of same thing with Schumer. So that's where I kind of think Rounds took the lead last go round to kind of try to take the politics out of it, but it seemed like it kind of went nowhere. But they're still fighting for it, just like very much behind closed doors. Because as you and I were chatting about, our latest post at askapoleuaps.com is with Senator Roger Wicker. He's Mississippi Republican, but he's the chair of SASC, or the Senate Armed Services Committee. That is super powerful. And because he's the chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, he automatically gets a seat on Senate Intel, I believe. I think he's ex facto or some word like that. And so he's, it's interesting because he was just in the 60 Minutes episode on the drones or whatever was flying over Jersey. Yeah. And when I go up to Wicker, he goes, I just sent it to you, but his exact quote is, "I don't want to be quoted about drones." And yet he was just on 60 Minutes. Well, so what that tells me is, okay, Wicker is conversing. Like he knows about the UAPDA because that's always like been gutted historically behind closed doors when the Senate Armed Services Committee is, you know, hashing out differences on that big NDAA or National Defense Authorization Act. When they're hashing out differences between the Senate and the House, those committees that are at that table are just Armed Services Committee from Senate and House, and then the Intel Committee, Senate and House. And for the past couple of years, ever since Schumer's amendment was first gutted, I've been on a hunt, like at least once a month, but usually every couple of weeks, I'm asking different senators on Intel and Armed Services, hey, who gutted the Senate Majority Leader's amendment? You know, Schumer's powerful, but somehow, some way, his personal amendment was gutted now twice, back to back in secret. And, you know, I've been talking to all the folks on Armed Services Committee, like Senator Wicker, et cetera, and they've all kind of been like, no, wasn't us. But what we know now is Senator Wicker, the chair, he's conversant, like he knows about the topic. He doesn't want to talk about it, but that's where I'm going to keep pressing him. So send me any questions.
Because he's in the thick of it, or he's trying to distance himself from it? Like which?
Well, I mean, people are really, pardon my French, but like really shitting on him for, you know, telling us at Askapol, hey, I don't want to be quoted on drones. This is where I play devil's advocate on my professor's side. Like, this is classified material that we're talking about. Yeah. And so, like, I get it. And like anytime there's a SCIF briefing, you know, a classified meeting where they all go in this like sensitive, compartmented facility, I forget the whole term, but anytime, say, AOC, you know, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's like a social media darling, always on Instagram, always on X and Blue Sky, blah, blah, blah. When she comes out of a SCIF, she's literally like, no, her rule is just not answering any questions. And like what I've learned with her is I just wait a week or two, ask her the same questions I had. I just don't mention the SCIF and then usually get her to open up. But so in their defense, this is classified information.
Sure.
But then also to play the other side, they are allowing the Trump White House to claim the FAA knows what all this stuff over U.S. airspace was. No, look at Askapol, UAP.com. We've talked to New Jersey Senators Cory Booker, Andy Kim, and then a handful of the House members, Republicans included, from the Jersey delegation. End of last year in December, they got a private classified briefing from then Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas.
Yeah.
And guess what? Mayorkas told them, we have no idea what this is. Pentagon told lawmakers, and has been, you know, ever since the Langley incursion over Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, where it was shut down for 17 days at the end of 2023.
Like a big deal. Yeah.
A year later, the two Virginia senators, one who was then Senate Intel Chair, Mark Warner, but then also Tim Kaine, former VP nominee, the two of them got a classified briefing on the Langley incursion a year after it. So just this December. Yeah. And they say the Pentagon is still clueless. And literally look at the interview with Kaine and with Warner at AskAPolUAP.com. Both of them are like, we know the federal government lies sometimes, but they're like, this isn't it. They're not hiding stuff from us. They literally are clueless. And like, if you remember Langley, that's where America's 5th generation fighter jet, the F-22 Raptors.
If I'm not mistaken, whenever we had the Chinese spy balloon and when they shot it down off the coast of South Carolina, I believe the jets were scrambled from that Langley location. So
yeah. And so I just learned this with a post a couple weeks ago. Even though Langley, it's in Southern Virginia, it's about 200 miles from DC.
Yep.
So that takes about like a couple of hours, 3-4 hours, because you got to go on beautiful winding roads or over in the Smokies. But like, they, one of those F-22 Raptors from Langley, it can make it here to the nation's capital in 30 minutes. Oh, so that means that, so that fleet These and these are stealth, advanced fighter jets, kind of like the best in the world right now. The entire fleet of F-22s had to be moved from Langley because of these
I heard about that.
drone, but
Yeah.
straight up UAP incursions over the base. So they move like this advanced fighter fleet. Like, what did the Pentagon come up with in like the year since then? Nets. They literally bought a bunch of nets to cover up the F-22 fleet because that's going to distract the drones. Like, this is our near $1 trillion a year Pentagon has no idea. Like, even though people are becoming multimillionaires from what President Eisenhower warned of, the military-industrial complex,
Yeah.
like our military contractors are just like churning out all these boats and submarines, blah, blah, blah. Well, guys, if you think this is foreign nations who are invading U.S. airspace regularly and going over sensitive sites like Langley, like a bunch of nuclear facilities in New Jersey, the drones or UAPs, they were hovering over 2 different munitions depots that are still active. And so, and the current president's golf course in Bedminster.
So why did they get a pass on it whenever the press secretary came out with the FAA research question? Like, no one asked the follow-up question just to say, okay, then why did the FBI and the folks who sat in front of Congress, what was it, like November, December's timeframe, and they said, we don't know what they are. Why not just ask that follow-up question? Even in that press briefing where the press secretary said that in January, no one said anything. They just left it.
Dude, and this is where
Matt Laslo's.
Well, this is where like the press corps is kind of falling into, well, the press corps, like many in Congress, want an out and they want an easy answer. And they just like latch on to it and they're like, hey, we got an answer. And like, again, in their defense, it's rare for the press corps and the American people to just be straight up lied to from the press briefing room in the White House. But it's become regular in the past, like recent years, recent administrations.
Sure.
I'm thinking Sean Spicer when he came out and claimed largest inauguration crowd in history, blah, blah, blah. But then even with Biden's administration, like they played fast and loose with a lot of things from that podium. And so the press corps definitely messed up on this one. And just, I think, like many in Congress, which you hear with my interviews with all 100 senators, I think the big problem is just a lack of inquisitiveness. And they've allowed themselves to kind of fall into this false trope or whatever, false dichotomy where it's like, all right, we're either investigating little green men, as someone like Jim Himes, the top Democrat on the House Intel Committee, he always says little green men and then laughs off the topic. But it's between that and on the other end, I guess, just like this protectionism where they don't want to know. But I'm like, guys, we're watching the first drone war ever play out in Ukraine, with Ukraine and Russia. Like, that is just, that war has changed the way warfare is done forever. And so, well, we're pumping all this money into, again, these old school, ships, subs, planes that are too fast to stop an invading Chinese balloon.
Yeah.
Like,
and that was my concern. That's what got me to speaking to Senator Ted Budd's office whenever they sent me a meeting request. At first, it looked like it was going to have Ted Budd on it. I was like, holy crap, I'm actually going to be on a live conference with Ted Budd. Well, then they responded and said, he's not going to be available. You will be on with his DOD staffers, but it will be, in person. And that was just my question to his staff is, I see that you've recorded the response from Ted Budd when you asked him about David Grush, that he said, I know you said Tillis here in North Carolina, Tillis was skeptic, somewhat indifferent, but that Ted Budd was aware, but he hadn't investigated. They told me that, the balloon situation was still under investigation, and I kind of pushed on that a little bit because I don't know if you remember or not. There were several shoot downs. A lot of people focus on the South Carolina shoot down, but there were several shoot downs, and we did not get any follow up what that was, what was recovered. And I asked them about that, and they said they couldn't comment because the senator was still investigating that. I didn't know if you had heard more.
Dude, so actually at askapoluap.com, and again, this is where like the press corps just moves on. Yeah. But I'm like, guys, American airspace, like what did we learn with that Chinese balloon incident? And this is something that Senator Gillibrand has been fighting for in the NDAA. Like, again, we drop about $1 trillion a year on our Pentagon. And turns out we don't even have proper radars. So like one thing Gillibrand's fighting for is sensors at every level of the sky, which like is literally mind blowing because our, again, near $1 trillion a year Pentagon does not know what's above, not just U.S. airspace,
like 60,
they don't know what's
feet. Yeah.
Yeah. What even from like the ground really low to and stuff high, etc. And so like America, it just feels like we've fallen into this complacency. And with lawmakers, I don't know. It's weird to me because I'm like, for one, I would never want to be a politician. I used to cover entertainment, and I'm like, why did I leave music writing? But I've always said, like, I know how to deal with asshole senators because I've dealt with asshole musicians. But I'm like, when you're a musician, like,
rock stars, right?
But yeah, but like you get a play in front of a crowd, like boom, that's the payoff, and money, blah, 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 fame. But also, it's just like get your juices going. The only reason I would ever want to be in Congress would be to see the secrets, everything else in their job, all the fundraising, all the like, the cocksucking or whatever that they do. Like the last thing I'd ever want to do with my life. The only tempting thing about their job is the power to like see inside, like in back of the veil.
Yeah.
And yet they all just seem like afraid to, uninquisitive, and again, just very complacent in like, oh, the Pentagon's got it. Like, guys, they don't. Like, unless they do know what all this stuff is, then why not tell that to the American people? But again, Senators Warner and Kane are like, no. We don't think they're lying to us. We kind of know when they are. But they're like, they just don't know. The interesting thing that we broke the news recently at askapoluap.com, a Republican from Jersey, he told us that they actually had recovered a craft from Langley. I just asked a senior Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee about that, and he basically confirmed it. That post is, no, I think I put that in our private chat because the interview was just on deep background. But that's something I'm going to be exploring. And it sounds like we didn't shoot it down. The U.S. didn't shoot it down. It sounds like it crashed. And from what they've said, there's not. It seems like it was if this happened, it seems like it was going very fast. And like, there's not a ton. There's not like a full object from what it sounds like.
Yeah.
But I'm like, wait, why? Like, I asked the senior member of Senate Intel, like, did you ask to see it? Have you seen it? And he's like, no, let me check. Why isn't your first reaction to go see it? And so, like, back to your question here, I circled back with the Alaska senators on whether they asked the Air Force to see their video of the object that was downed. Initially, Murkowski and Sullivan, the Alaska senators, told me no, they hadn't seen what was shot down. Well, then a few months later, 6 or so months later, last year, I asked Sullivan again, like, hey, have you asked to see it yet? And he was kind of like, yeah, I think I did. I think he was wrong or misspoke. But he claimed he saw it again, I need to like circle back again, but I
Yeah.
did it with Michigan Senator Gary Peters, because one of the other
One
ones,
was over Alaska, right? I mean, they're
one was over Alaska, one Michigan.
one Michigan.
And
That's
again,
right.
when I asked Senator Peters in Michigan, he was like, no, we haven't seen it. So again, you just have these lawmakers like the media where we just like lazily accept the Pentagon's line, the federal government's line.
It's
And I'm
such
like,
an easy
guys,
line, though, just to say it's yeah, we shot down another balloon and just pull out some balloon fragments like what they did in Roswell and then just call it a day. That's what interests me in that so much, and why I went back to it with Senator Ted Budd's office is it's very easy to get out of that one and just say it was just some balloon stuff. If you guys want to go see it, here it is, and just put
right.
together a bunch of junk and just say, here it is. I mean, this is what a shot down balloon looks like. But they don't do that. So, and then I hear senators telling me, because I believe you may know better than me, but I believe I don't have his credentials, but Ted Budd is on one of these defense committees. I don't know which one, or the
I
intelligence
think
committee.
he's on, this is my handy, this is a
Oh,
little
there you have it.
physical congressional Facebook, old school. I'm pretty sure he's on Armed Services
Armed Services
Committee.
And they told me that. So that's why I was curious. Is I'm like, okay, this guy, and he actually his staffers spent some of that call because Kirkpatrick at the time was over Arrow, and they spent some of the call defending Kirkpatrick, saying that he was trying to remove stigma from the UAP topic. But that was like a year and a half ago, I think. But it was just really interesting to hear them, instead of just say, yeah, we don't, they actually said, no, we don't want to talk about it. It's an active investigation. It's ongoing. And because my concern to them was, that people have died. I don't know if you know this story or not, but people have died from balloon bombs in our country before. It happened.
Turn of the century, or
happened in 1944. You can go look it up on the Air Force's website. If you go look up just Japanese balloon bomb, it'll take you. I think the first article that Google references is the Air Force release of this. I know someone personally. I can't name him, but he was part of the Air Force declassification groups, and I know it. It's verified. And he told me about it because he was talking to me about Roswell. But he said, we got the idea to do the surveillance balloons, because he's still sticking to that story with Roswell. He said, we got that because of the Japanese releasing. They released 9,000 balloons during a 5-month period in 1944.
really?
To be caught into the wind currents to come here. They said 1,000 reached. This is all off the Air Force's website. It said 1,000 reached our continent. There was 285 incidents. Some went as far as Michigan. And in 1945, this is what my source told me about. That was part of Air Force declassification at the Pentagon. He said in 1945, 6 people were killed in Oregon because they found one. It was launched by the Japanese. They tried to drag it out of the woods and it killed them. They were picnicking. They're on a picnic there in.
What's the moral of the story, guys? Don't drag the bomb.
Yeah, don't drag it out.
Leave the bomb.
Apparently, it was still in some type of balloon apparatus or something. So I just bring that up just to say these are the things I'm bringing up to them. If they're doing that in the 40s, now we have more advanced, or probably at higher altitudes now. And you bringing up the point about radars. It concerns me that we're not getting any feedback on these shoot downs yet. It's like, how many things are at 65,000 feet and we just don't see them? Because it went right over my home here in North Carolina, the Chinese problem. I couldn't see it. I mean, some people were able to get it if you had the Samsung Super Zoom phone or whatever, but I couldn't see it. But it's definitely concerning.
It's so interesting. Dude, so I did just look it up. Initially, I grabbed the 115th Congress book, but then I grabbed the 118th. They still don't have the new one, 119th. But he's on the Armed Services Committee. And I was actually going to ask you, do you have any questions that us at Ask a Poll UAPs should ask Senator Budd?
I mean, that's the only one I didn't get into right there, Matt. And I would be curious, because while we talk here, I'm going to find the site for you. I would be curious if they even knew about that. if they knew about that incursion, because that's really concerning if people who are in charge of looking out for security don't even know about past events that they should be careful of.
Yeah.
And especially if we've had another incursion. So, if this person who worked at the Pentagon that told me about that did Air Force declassification, if they wouldn't have told me about that incident of the 6 persons dying as a result of that,
Yeah.
I would have never known that happened. So, I would be very
That's
curious.
why reading is cool. I'm taking notes. I'm gonna look this up when we're done.
So it's on right now. I'm looking at it on the website. It's on, there you go. It's on National Museum of the United States Air Force. And their title of the article is called Balloon Bombs. It's called Balloon Bombs, Japan's Answer to Doolittle. So if you go read that article, I know the person who, sorry, hit my mic. I know the person who says he was part of the declassification team on the top secret documents for that. I will send you in chat. I don't want to put it out here what he told me because it doesn't have his name and stuff on it, but I'll let you see what he states, because we were talking about Roswell, and we've been told it was first weather balloon, and then they updated it, I think, in the 90s to say it was reconnaissance based, right? And it, we lied about weather balloons. It was actually reconnaissance or weather balloons, or reconnaissance balloons. That's what he's sticking by. I asked him about bodies, and he said a KC-47 refueler went down as well, and it had bodies expelled, and people don't know what bodies look like when they hit the ground at that force. They shrink. That's what he claimed. But anyways,
Interesting.
So I would be curious about that. Do they know that when people are asking about balloon incursions, that we've actually had balloon incursions in our past? That's why people are concerned, is like, you let it go over our heads. How many more are up there? Do we have the technologies? What are they going to do about that to upgrade the technologies? Like, that would be my first thing that I would be asking someone in defense.
And like, if you think about it, like, to me, because at least on Capitol Hill, again, these are UAPs, UFOs in like the technical senses of the terms. They have no idea what these objects are. Right. But on Capitol Hill, what I always do is I just adapt to whoever my source is, whoever I'm interviewing. I use their terminology. So if they're going to call it a drone, I'll call it a drone.
Sure, fine.
But even though I know that you have no fucking idea whether that's a drone or not, they, like, literally, it was in December, the House Homeland Security Committee, they had under oath FBI, DOJ, and Center for Border Patrol, all 3 of them testifying publicly under oath that they literally have no idea what any of the objects over Jersey were. And like, that's what's really unsettling. But like, again, when I talk to them, I'll be like, yeah, these drones, I'll like use their terminology, but I'm like, there's just like this ignorance, and it's either that they are all in on the secret, but I don't think they even want to be in on the secret. Even people on these committees, which if that's the case, again, that's a hunch, but yeah, so like, I'm never in the skiff with them, so I don't know what they're like. Maybe they're all just the world's best poker players, and they like are well read in on this, but they just play stupid every time I ask them simple questions about what's hovering over their constituents' houses. And so that's where, like, again, going back to Eisenhower and military-industrial complex, like, we have this beast that's like ever growing and will never be satiated, and it's called the Pentagon. And like, it's gonna just like keep growing, blah blah blah. But what kind of terrifies me, if these things are foreign nations, which most lawmakers on the Hill, if they're even paying attention, they'll be like, yeah, we think it's foreign nations. But I'm like, literally, stop and think about what you're saying, because this is what Senator Kelly, the former astronaut, always tells me. Like, he's 1000% convinced that this is just regular invasions by the Chinese or Iran or North Korea or etc.
Kelly thinks that?
Kelly, yeah, because he's
Arizona, right?
and he's so 1000% convinced that there's no UFOs, UAPs. He's so convinced of that he's 100% convinced because his Air Force Base, Luke Air Force Base, where they have the Barry Goldwater Field, which has been known to have these incursions from huge objects or whatever that literally like shut down the base. Well, he's just convinced that these are foreign adversaries. I'm like, if you, as a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, but like, if you think that U.S. airspace is regularly invaded by our enemies and you're not screaming it from the rooftops, like you're derelict of your most basic duty in the Constitution.
Rough. That's a harder sell.
Well, and this is like the crazy thing is that with all of our advanced technology, blah, 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 it seems like our biggest vulnerabilities are these very lo-fi things. A balloon invading our airspace, a drone, ... And so I kind of am really pressing lawmakers, ones who aren't interested in the UAP topic and aren't inquisitive there. I'm kind of like pressing them to like go to the logical conclusion of their thinking that like we are regularly invaded by our adversaries, but like in a way that our advanced technology is either unadvanced in the end, which is what some think, or in some cases we're too advanced, because if our planes, like if we don't have a plane that can go slow enough to study a balloon, it's like those F-22 Raptors, they can go slower, but when they're hitting DC in 30 minutes, going 200 miles in 30 minutes, those planes can't like stop very easily and be like, oh, this is what this thing is.
Yeah, let's hang out here for a second and look at this thing. Yeah.
So I'm saying, if anyone out there listening, if any of you know how to make balloons, the Pentagon might have a contract for you.
Yeah. Hey, I have an interesting thread to pull there though with Kelly, because he was an astronaut, as you stated, and if he is, sounds like he's pretty gung-ho that this is a foreign adversary and it's nothing extraterrestrial or interdimensional and all that. What I'd be curious is, I don't know if I'm sure you've heard of Chris Bledsoe covering the space of UAPs. And have you heard of this character that Diana Pasulka writes about, Tim Taylor?
I'm vaguely familiar.
She uses a pseudonym for him in her book called Tyler D. And then it comes out that his name is Tim Taylor.
That's right.
NASA controller. And apparently he's been one for like 30 years, 30, 40 years. I mean, goes way back. No one can nail him down. He won't do any interviews, but he'll bring in Chris Bledsoe. So that's why it's interesting. Mm-hmm. He brought Chris Bledsoe into NASA, and when they asked Chris Bledsoe, so what were you doing there? He's like, I asked Tim the same thing, and he told me this, that the astronauts are seeing orbs. And the question was then, which astronauts? And Chris Bledsoe says all of them. He said all of them have seen orbs. Mm-hmm. So see, there's your good question for Kelly, is like, is that true? Because according to multi-decade NASA controller Tim Taylor, and Chris Bledsoe documented a lot of it. He's seen sitting there in the boardroom at NASA with Tim Taylor, and I have my questions about the Chris Bledsoe experience myself. I remain objective in all things, but at the same time, they, whether you like it or not, they offered him in and they welcomed him. I don't get welcomed to NASA. I don't know about you, but no one sits me down in a NASA boardroom and talks to me about these things. So they brought him there for a reason, and it didn't look like it was just one of your standard NASA walkthroughs where they give you a patch and a sticker and send you on your way and let you look around at some cool stuff. Like he was meeting with some actual insiders. So I'd be curious about that.
I was going to say, I do miss Bill Nelson as the head of NASA, because I always, when Bill Nelson, he was senator from Florida, and I always covered him for Miami's NPR station, WLRN, but then also WFSU in Tallahassee. So, and it was funny because he was a former senator. Whenever he was at the Capitol, the literal NASA administrator, he would have no security detail. He would have no aide. You know, usually there's an aide like carrying their, you know, papers or even just a notepad to take notes. He would just be walking around, like the NASA administrator would just be walking around his old haunt, the Capitol, alone. And he was conversant enough in the topic. But that's where I'm curious, because a lot of people were looking at this new administration, like what we saw this week with the release of these JFK files. So like we still might get more disclosure. And I do, to circle way back to where we were at the start of this conversation, that's where that might be why the House UAP caucus, et cetera, isn't feeling as much pressure or isn't putting as much pressure on the new administration as they were the last one, because I think there's a lot of hope, and especially like they would claim this, I don't use MAGA derogatory way, but like most of the UAP caucus is more MAGA. And
I have a question about that. I have a question about that.
Paulina Luna, Tim Burchett, Eric Burleson. You know, Burchett was one of the 8 who ousted former Speaker McCarthy, so he's like the far to fringe right of the party. But because they have such slim margins in the House, any member is really empowered, even the fringe ones. And so that's where I've been curious why they haven't really flexed, because Speaker Johnson can really only lose one Republican vote on any bill, just like we saw with the government funding fight last week. And so that's where I was curious why these UAP caucus members didn't try to exert more pressure and like use that natural power that they have right now. But I think part of that, the reason they're not stepping on the gas right now is they think, because we all have to remember, it's only March. The Trump administration like just started like a month and a half ago, basically. And so like it feels to us in the media like it's been years, you know, and many of you sitting out there, depending on your persuasion, it either feels like years or it feels like it's been years and you're giddy with what's going on. But it's, I think that's where all of us, you know, watching this from afar or whatever, we feel this sense of immediacy. Congress goes slow, and sometimes it's actually like Congress at its best is when it's the tortoise and not the hare. When we've seen Congresses in the past be the hare, then we've seen them really get crap wrong, like with allowing warrantless wiretapping of Americans, to name one. And so that's where like, you've kind of seen the UAP caucus in the House evolve into this new secrets task force. Granted, they're 2 separate entities, but practically speaking, that secrets task force is now like an empowered UAP caucus, even though on their plate, UAPs seems to be a very small sliver. Like at UAPs.com, we just broke a week or 2 ago, no, maybe last week, in their first meeting of the secrets task force, UAPs did not come up once. And a lot of people, you know, probably rightly so, got really frustrated at that. But I think kind of the reason for that is they're kind of letting the administration, you know, fill out some of these undersecretaries, and they're kind of
that makes sense.
Doing quiet diplomacy. I don't want to make it sound like they're being very active right now, but they're kind of like waiting because they trust the administration to disclose some stuff. Obviously, all the Democrats are like, how dare you? How can you trust these lying blah, blah, blahs? And so, again, it's only been a couple months into the new administration, and I'm going to keep us at Ask a Poll. We're going to keep pressing them on that, but that's kind of what I'm watching for, whether there is some kind of data dump from the administration on old, you know, Roswell files, etc. Or if there's not, whether we then see Congress come roaring back. I don't really predict that, at least with these Republican members, but because they feel like they're fighting deep state and something deeper, you know, hidden SAPs within the federal government, I think their natural tendency in this hyper-partisan environment is going to be to, you know, just be in lockstep with Trump. I think if they took a step back, you know, unless Trump was asked for all the documents and was read them all and then decided, hey, my campaign rhetoric was one thing, but this is really national security and I can't disclose this. I doubt that he reads that much. I doubt that he cares about this issue that much, but I don't know the man. And so, and I'm not connected to him in any way, like especially Republicans in Congress are. And so I'm a little, not more lenient. I've been very hard on the Secret Task Force and all these folks, but I do recognize that that one might take a little bit of time, because even if you remember when they dropped the Epstein stuff,
will they choose the
but
loyalty?
Like they really fumbled that. Pardon me, brother.
I said, like, will they choose the loyalty though over the task at hand? I guess you could say, because like, and the reason I question that is, Paulina Luna, as soon as the press secretary put out the statement about it being FAA research with the drones, Nancy Mace, Paulina Luna, they're like, oh, you know, promises kept, you know, blah, 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 and the party line that they put out. And I'm like, you didn't even ask a follow-up question. You're supposed to be this UAP, you know, investigator almost on the Hill. What happened there? And so it's made me question if it comes down to loyalty, as we hear it. I don't mean it derogatory either, but MAGA, you know, it's a mantra. You know, if it comes down to loyalty to that, or loyalty to a cause of a task force where you're trying to disclose and find information about UAPs, like, don't you think they're going to pick loyalty? Like if Trump told them, hey, just leave this alone for a little while, and I promise you I'll make it worth your while, they'd leave it alone, right?
I think if Trump shot a man on Fifth Avenue, they'd be like, shoot that one too. They'd probably point at me.
So this makes me wonder, like, are we going to get anywhere if he's not interested? Will that?
And so and this is so like Trump, he's impossible to figure out on one level. You know, he might, you know, be erratic, blah, blah, blah. But he's also like kind of predictable and methodical. And I think, you know, if it'll get him a big news flash, something like that. I think with this one, and I've kind of had this. So what? We haven't dropped this interview yet at askapoluaps.com, but it's probably coming either tomorrow or Saturday. Hard to think about what day it was. But so we have this new exclusive with Senator Rounds from South Dakota, the Republican, who is the one with Chuck Schumer on his UAPDA Act. Rounds, and he, like Gillibrand, they're two of only 6 senators, at least in the last Congress. There were only 6 of the 100 senators who sat on both the Armed Services and the Intelligence Committee. So they have, you know, beaten both of the, you know, bottomless pit of American secrets, and just like a lot of power in both of those committees, kind of focused on some different things. Rounds, even though he's pushing the administration like he did the last one, because he told us last week that he still wants to introduce their UAPDA as a part of this year's NDAA, once that comes up more towards the fall or after summer, or the lead up to summer. Well, Rounds, he says, from what he's seen, he's like, the FAA, he's pretty convinced. He's like, the FAA knew what a lot of this stuff was. When I kind of pushed him, like, hey, what about you know, these munitions depots, Trump's thing? He's like, So it seems, and again, remember, I'm a political communications prof, where I like, in one of my courses, I was training like the political director of MoveOn.org, you know, that far left group, and a Trump press secretary in the same classroom. Well, so I kind of know to listen for the crickets, etc. And this one, it seems like they were saying something with assurance that was true, just because it would be so stupid to just do like that bald face of a lie. Well, then I'm correcting myself because I'm thinking back to Spicer and the, you know, lying about the crowd size in the first inauguration. But it seems like a lot of what people started citing, because, you know, some of those videos did come back and it was just like, hey guys, that's an osprey. But so like, yeah, there was some dumb stuff like that. But then I pushed back and I'm like, yeah, we're not talking about the one that was the obvious osprey.
Right.
You know, like, sure, that duped a few novices who are just like freaked out by what's flying over their head. But so I don't think, you know, these powerful members of Senate Intel and Armed Services who have been inquisitive and are still pushing on this issue, like, it seems like they heard enough to be placated and their fear isn't in Jersey anymore, because what we've kind of seen, if all of these are linked, and they might all be separate state actors, they all might be different things from above or other universe, like whatever they are, we've been seeing them. What, at the start of last year, Gillibrand, she went on a classified tour of Nevada where she met with Air Force officials who complained to her about the persistent invasion of U.S. airspace and sensitive airspace over nuclear sites. Well, we've had the same problem with, I think it's Site 42 out in California. That one had to, like, the FAA actually had to step in and restrict the airspace because of these incursions. And so then we've also had that in Jersey. But then what we kind of see, like with Langley, that was a 17-day incursion and then nothing since. Well, then the problem went to up north to Jersey, etc. And so it seems like these lawmakers are, whatever they know, and they know a lot more than I do, it seems like they're not worried about Jersey anymore. And my question is, okay, but where are they, whatever they are, where are they going to go next? You know,
Well, I
because
mean,
it doesn't seem like our, yeah, brother.
Is that why they brought in Grush? I mean, did you see Paulina Luna's tweet yesterday about Burleson bringing in Grush as a staffer? I mean, is that going to give us the
was
direction?
she quoting? Was she quoting Askapol? Because
I just saw a tweet where she just said, I just spoke to Eric Burleson and he has obtained permission to bring Grush on as a staffer.
Interesting. Yeah, so we broke that story that Burleson and them were looking at bringing in Grush. After we're done here, I might just give Congressman Burleson a call. Because him and I have been talking about this for more than a year now. He was trying to hire Grush as a staffer last year. It didn't work out. This year, he was trying to get oversight committee to hire him. So interesting. No, I missed that yesterday.
Him in the halls of Congress, I guess, right? If the staffers, you have access to staffers, no, or do you? Do you really talk to staffers a lot, or
you will? Yes and no. We have full access to all these staffers, but every staffer is so terrified to talk to the media, which I think is like a little bit dumb on their parts. It makes sense on one level, just like bland self-preservation, because it's like, oh, this is a way to avoid, you know, me putting myself out there, me hurting my boss, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But I'm like, guys, your bosses are not loyal to you at all. Like, if you want to really survive on the Hill and thrive, don't ever be quoted by name in my outlets or, New York Times, Washington Post, like, yeah, that's sure to get you fired. But do use the press corps as your pawns. Like, again, I teach political comms. Like, there's a way that those folks can come forward and, just empower themselves by basically living up to their duty of serving the people. The Constitution says you don't work for, you don't swear a blood oath to Senator Rounds. You work Senator Rounds, but your blood oath is to the Constitution, or we're going to deport your ass.
Well, and that's why it made me curious when I saw the tweet come out from her yesterday, that Burleson was bringing him in as a staffer, and that he actually did obtain the permission. So this wasn't a tweet about her saying, he's looking into it. To your point, he's been looking into it for a while. But no, this was a permission has been obtained. He's going to be a staffer. So I think that's maybe giving some of us the wonder of like, okay, then this is definitely going to go in a direction of at least you would think some of the claims he's made, right, of crash retrievals. And then potentially, are we going to get into investigations about people who have been hurt because he made claims that people have been hurt in the name of UAP containment and research and things like that. So it sounds like you're going to have an interesting staffer walking around the halls here very soon.
I mean, I hope he's not an expert on Epstein, but like maybe he's an expert on the COVID origins. Like, yeah, I say that wryly, but like, it's been hard for me, again, professor at Johns Hopkins in our master's program, like someone who's been covering Congress 19 years, it's become a little bit hard for me to take the Secrets Task Force seriously. And like my kind of gut suspicion, and I could be totally wrong here, but to me, it kind of feels like a, not a psyop, but like, how do you take a committee that's doing a really important investigation that the government doesn't want you to be investigating? How do you, like, if you neuter them, they're going to take to social media and bitch and moan and they're going to burn your house down. Yeah. But like, how do you like neuter them in a very like subtle way? You kind of put them in charge of investigating every conspiracy ever. And so like, just naturally, the fact that their investigation went from UAPs to Epstein, JFK, MLK, 9/11, literally 9/11. So like, are you guys going to be telling us about like how Dick Cheney wired the Twin Towers to implode? Our government's too inept to have done that, guys. Like, I've seen them up close and personal. If they did that, like, wow, they've only been able to get away with something once. Because like, this government's stupid, you know? And so I think, and again, prove me wrong, UAP caucus, but I think by extending them and having them now investigate all of these secrets and conspiracies, it kind of, like what? This also, we haven't dropped yet, but Senator Rounds, I asked him about the Secrets Task Force. And, you know, then it just became a couple of minutes of him and I joking and mocking them, you know, because like literally you're going to investigate all this stuff that's just like divided Americans, or like Scorsese is like totally vehemently opposed to where Ken Burns is on the subject, just to like pull that out of my rear. And so we'll see. They still have time, and I guess the task force just has a 6-month window. They can potentially get an extension to that. Now that they have Grush on there, that actually might, this is why I'm always playing devil's advocate, that might really help them get very focused, maybe have a, well, because Luna, last time I spoke with her about this, she said what their plan was to bring Grush, Lou Elizondo, and Arrow into the same skiff, and then you can have the witnesses being questioned by like the overseer, and it'll be interesting to see if that happens. Now that Grush, from what you're telling me, is going to be a staffer.
Yeah.
Like I've never seen a committee staffer pulled in as a witness, but again, then I've never been in a skiff. So even them hiring someone who's been a witness and then someone at the center of this, I've really never seen that done in my 19 years covering Congress. And then I've read a biography on every U.S. president, haven't come across it there, and a ton of books on Congress. And so this is new. This is something I haven't seen. And so
it's going to be interesting. Yeah. And I mean, that's why I wanted to get your take on it, because it'll definitely, if you ask me, it sounds like even you agree, it's going to change the trajectory somewhat. Maybe give some,
especially with, pardon me, like especially with them going after these high profile things, like hell yeah, I want to know. I want to read every document tied to JFK. I want to know what Ted Cruz's father did. Just kidding.
Well, but I mean,
remember Trump accused Ted Cruz's dad in 2016 of assassinating JFK.
Yes,
so like, yeah, there are important questions that have always, again, divided Americans, but also just like sucked us in. Like we can't look away anytime the grassy knoll comes up or whatever. But now having Grush, so like, yeah, they're going to be getting the headlines. They're going to be out there in public with like, COVID origins. Yeah, that's going to be a blockbuster hearing. But knowing while all of that made for TV stuff is happening, that Grush is, it seemed, going to be like working in the background. And if he gets his clearance back, which he should, well, then is he going to be like reaching out, but now with power, to spots where he wasn't able to see inside this program, and like knowing that his thoughts are then going to be going into those letters that will get sent out by Luna, by Burleson, and by, probably the Task Force United, because everyone, don't forget this, after the July 2023 House Oversight hearing with Grush, Graves, and like every lawmaker coming out of that, and I'll say askapolluaps.com, like I just stood in the hall. So I listen on C-SPAN in one ear to what's going on in the committee, so I know what's being asked. But then when lawmakers come out, that's when I get them one-on-one for our exclusive interviews. Every lawmaker exiting, whether it was Congresswoman Nancy Mace, more of a moderate from South Carolina, who's now like eyeing run for the governor. Jamie Raskin, Democrat, constitutional lawyer from Maryland. He headed up one of Trump's impeachments. He came out of there being like, hey, what Grush told me sounds true. And he's like, he seems honest and credible. I want to hear from him in the skiff. Well, obviously, same thing with all the UAP caucus folks. But then you also had AOC coming out of there saying the same thing. She wanted to talk to Grush in the skiff to explore more of, the military contracting side of this secrecy. And so, like, the chair of that committee was Glenn Gruthman from Wisconsin, this frumpy old dude who, like, he came out of there being like, yeah, I have more questions. We need him in a skiff. Same with James Comer, and the chair of the oversight committee. But one thing is, since that July 2023 testimony from Grush, these members, because they're newer, they're not on the armed services. Most of them aren't on armed services or the Senate or on the House Intelligence Committee, so they are limited in their access. And so it took them even like more than 9 months just to get a skiff briefing where they kind of got questions answered, because they had one skiff briefing 3 months after it where they came out so pissed because they were like, these people didn't do their homework. They didn't even know the answer to stuff that we, of course, were going to ask because it just came up in this public hearing with Grush. And so, yeah, this could get interesting, y'all.
Yeah, and I mean, I know the community is going to definitely stay attached to that, and I think that's going to conclude the time that we had today. And
What I was just going to say,
I think I've reached
and
everything.
pardon me,
so, yeah, give me something. What do you want to leave us with, Matt?
well, I was going to say this could actually get interesting because we just had the divisive 2024 election where like UAPs, even though like it's a crazy topic, y'all know sometimes it gets heated in the spaces. But this issue has always been refreshingly nonpartisan, just like completely around the election. Yeah, you saw some members try to lob some partisan bombs, you know, some Dems being like, oh, House Republicans aren't investigating UAPs, like whatever. The election's over. But now we're in this new administration where everything's becoming hyper partisan. Like Trump can't even like hug a baby or kiss a baby without Democrats saying he's the devil. And so like this gives UAPs the opportunity to again kind of become that oasis from the bullshit, you know, the hyper partisan BS that dominates this town. And so I think members of both parties, if they're able to keep this a safe space, to like reclaim it as a nonpartisan space, I think that would really empower them. And, you know, because that would pull the public in and show that they're serious and united. So, yeah, I have lots of questions and I'll be watching. Send me your